Why is this coming up? Damn it. Damn it! Why is that coming up? Come on, let me know what you see. Let me set up. If you're online, let me know. Oh my gosh, okay. I got it, guys. You don't have to keep tweeting. Okay. Okay. Got it, got it, got it. Oh my gosh!
convincing to have things our way. Well, now my heart is open and I'm ready to receive. Although I know it's risky, baby, something in me wants to believe. Oh, baby, in the act of forgiveness, forgetting the past, we need a love that's determined to last. The act of forgiveness, beginning today. Gonna learn to love you in a brand new way. Words that like punches, aim straight for the heart. They were meant to be quick, baby, meant to keep us apart. But somewhere down under, all the hurt and the pain, love helps us surrender all the guilt and the blame. It heals all of our sorrow, and it dried all of our tears. I know that love was a potion, baby, and then it all disappeared.
All right. I think I got the right link up and running now. So let me give people a few more minutes to catch up. And hopefully they're going to join us pretty quick. Let's see. Someone just sent me a new message. What does it say? It says, okay, hang on just a second, guys. I'll fix it. Let me go over here. Live dashboard. Let me go here. Stick with me. The first one's always rough, and then we get it going. So hang on. Live dashboard. Stick with me. The first one's always rough, and then we get it going. All right. I see the numbers going up, so it looks like we have people viewing, which is awesome. All right. So basically, this is our first review for the year. Hopefully you can hear me and everything's going well. Let me see. I got a couple of things I want to shut down here. All right. If you have any trouble hearing me or anything like that, just send me a message via the YouTube chat. I've turned off my remind just because it'll confuse me, and I'm old and all these different things going on. It just gets crazy. So anyway, welcome to the first review. This is for our test in A-Push tomorrow, covering periods 1 and 2. I'm going to be talking through the periods, and you just if you have any questions, you can ask me as I go. If something happens and I don't get your question, just maybe someone else can help out and everything. I'm trying to make sure everything's working here, so bear with me. Oh my goodness. There we go. Okay, that's what I wanted to see happen. All right. So like I said, first review covering periods 1 and 2. That's going to be 1491 all the way up to about 1750. We're going to talk about Spanish colonization, French colonization, maybe a little bit about the Dutch, and of course English colonization and the 13 colonies. The way I work is I just start at the beginning and start talking my way through. And as stuff comes up, if you want to ask me questions, like I said, just put it in the live chat and we'll go from there. Basically, this is what we're going to look at. You're going to be looking at a PowerPoint sometimes on the screen. Sometimes it's me in the PowerPoint. I try to do more PowerPoint, less me, just because I'm a caring person and I don't think you guys need to see me all the time. So here we go. So let's get to the PowerPoint. Like I said, we're covering 1607 to 1700. And that's the year, but that's not all we're covering, because what I want to talk about briefly is the colonization prior to the English arriving. And of course, when we talk about that, we're talking about the Spanish, the French, and the Dutch. Now, you got to have some understanding of Spanish colonization. Be aware of the different explorers who came in, the conquistadors when they came in, because remember, the Spanish are going to come in for God, glory, and gold. And they're going to use the conquistadors as their, I guess, tool of choice, if you will, to gain control over the Spanish or over the Aztecs and the Incas and others such as that. Probably the most important, I guess, conquistador you should be aware of is Hernan Cortez. He is going to be the one to conquer the Aztecs, and he's going to move the Spanish Empire into present-day Mexico and up into the southwest of the United States. Hernan Cortez, like I said, is going to conquer the Aztecs, and that's going to start the movement of the Spanish beyond Mexico into the southwest, present-day Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, up into California. Now, like I said, the Spanish are coming for God, glory, and gold. Well, the conquistadors are going to bring us the glory. They're going to search for the gold, but they're also coming to help to convert the Native Americans. And the way the Spanish are going to do this is using the mission system. And the mission system, the way it was supposed to work is the Spanish would set up these missions. They'd bring in the Franciscan priests, and they would attempt to convert, but what they would do is try to build a community around the missions. And the idea was with a community, that's going to attract more colonists to the area. And by bringing create a stable society, if you will. And what we're going to find happen is it's not going to work out quite as well. The Spanish are going to have a difficult time attracting new colonists into the area. When we talk about the Spanish, be familiar with the Native American tribes that they're going to deal with. The Aztecs and the Pueblos are the big ones. And when we talk about the Pueblos, make sure you're familiar with Pueblos Revolt. That's the situation in which Pueblo Native Americans in the New Mexico area are going to come together under one tribe, under the leadership of Popé, and he's going to guide them in a revolution against Spanish control. Now, that's going to lead to the Spanish being pushed out. And while they're going to keep the Spanish out for several years, eventually they will move back in. But what it shows us, I think what the Pueblo Revolt, what it shows us is the power of the Native Americans should they choose to work together. And there's going to be several occasions throughout English colonial history and even into American history where Native Americans band together under the banner of a single tribe, and they let go of their individualism as individual tribes come together, and they're quite strong. The problem is those ties that bind them together for the initial success are weak. And so they'll start falling apart, and we'll see these revolts often crumble after they see initial success. While the Spanish are colonizing down in the southwest part of the United States and in Florida too, so we can't forget they're there. But while they're down there, we're going to see the French and Dutch come in more in the northeastern part of the United States, or present-day United States. The French are going to come down the St. Lawrence River, down from present-day Canada. They're coming primarily to trade. They want to colonize, but they're looking for more of a colonization based on proprietorship, based on making money. Many of the Frenchmen who come into the area are just planning to come in temporarily. They're coming in to trap fur, they're coming in to make their money, and the plan is to go back to France. Now, they're not going to build permanent settlements like you kind of see with the Spanish, with the different missions throughout Texas, New Mexico, and California. Instead, you're going to see them more of a trading post type settlement, where that's basically all they build is they build a trading post in which the trappers can come in, trade their furs, and then they go back out into the wilderness. One thing about the French and the Spanish that they did share, the one common tie, is the desire to convert the Native Americans. Now, the Spanish used a conversion method within the encomienda system, kind of a forced conversion. And we see with the encomienda, they're enslaving the Native Americans and they're trying to force them to convert to Catholicism. The French, completely different. While they wanted to convert them to Catholicism, they found the best way was to try to integrate themselves within the Native American tribes. The Jesuit priests would go into the tribes, they would live with them for a while, they would learn their languages, they would learn their customs, and in doing so they were able to communicate with the Native Americans in their language and in a way that they understood. So they tried to build a relationship with the natives first, then they would try to convert them. If they didn't convert, the French, it wasn't like a forcing, like, oh, you have to become Catholic. Instead, it was, we're offering this to you, and should you choose to take it, that would be great. But see, the French recognized how much they needed the Native Americans, because in my class, we talked about George Patton, and I got this from Tom Ritchie, where this Native American policy was either lead me, follow me, or get the hell out of my way. And what we find with the Spanish is they were a more of a, you follow me, you do what I say when I say it, and we'll get along fine. Whereas the French, they took that more lead me approach, where it's like, lead me to where I can find the furs. Lead me to your tribe and your customs, so I can communicate better with you. And so they're trying to build a trade relationship with them, a business relationship, but also a relationship kind of built on trust. So that's kind of the difference between the Spanish and the French when it comes to Native American relationships. The Dutch are going to come into present-day New York. Now, they're going to refer to that as New Amsterdam. And New Amsterdam was just set up for money. I mean, the Dutch was a trading empire. And so coming over here to the New World, they're able to set up a colony and have a new trade port, have some deep water ports. They're going to get into the fur trade as well. And they're going to kind of have a friendly relationship with the Native Americans as well, because they see the value of the Native Americans. Now, it's not always great because, I mean, they rip off the Native Americans on several occasions with buying land, and the island of Manhattan was like basically bought for a handful of wampum, or with beads, basically. But it's not a controversial or an antagonistic type relationship that the Dutch have with the Native Americans. So those are the three colonial powers in North America when we talk about, say, from 1492 all the way until 1600. So for the first 110 years of European contact within the North America, it's just those three countries. The English are nowhere to be found. Now, I mean, you can nitpick it and say, well, you had the Roanoke colony towards the end of the 1500s. That was introduced by Sir Walter Raleigh, but we talked about how they didn't have any success. In fact, they just disappeared. I think we're still looking for them today. But the English were pretty much staying out of it, and a lot of it was because they didn't have the military resources. They didn't have the power to come into, a system of colonization. It's not going to be until the Spanish Armada is defeated by the English that then they have that power to say, okay, now we can go out into the world. Now we can get our piece of this colonization pie. And of course, they're going to come over here to North America, and they're basically going to start with Jamestown. And in 1607, a ship sailed over here to modern-day Virginia, and they're going to start the first English colony of Jamestown. Now, Jamestown is going to be, the first year is going to be very difficult. And when we talk about it, make sure you recognize that the first few years in Jamestown was not successful. And though it was a proprietary colony, it definitely wasn't a moneymaker for several years. In fact, it's not going to be until John Rolfe and tobacco comes in that we see any profit in the Jamestown colony. When we look at motivations for colonizing North America with regards to England, we have the three different regions. You have the New England region, the Chesapeake region, and the Southern region. Now, the New England region is going to be colonized for religious reasons, and we talked about that in class. Whereas the middle colonies, the arrow's a little off, and the southern colonies are more economic, reasons. When you look at that, the middle colonies are going to have some religious undertones, obviously, with Pennsylvania and the Quakers, but really and truly, these colonies are being formed for economic reasons, and economic reasons only. So just keep that in mind as we go through all this. I'm not seeing any questions, so I'm just going to keep going. Basically, let me get over here real quick. Sorry, guys. Messed up my screen already. Bear with me. I'm getting all excited. Teaching history gets me excited, so sorry. 13 colonies, basically 3 regions, like I said. Here are the main colonies you need to be familiar with. In the New England colonies, obviously Massachusetts. And I'm going to talk about each of these a little later in brief, but just know these. The Mid-Atlantic colonies, also called the Middle colonies, is going to be, Pennsylvania is going to be the primary colony there. New York, obviously, is, a big colony, but it's like we talked about in my class, it's very non-heterogeneous. It was a royal colony. It was the least democratic colony of them all. So Pennsylvania is more of a model for what other colonies are going to look like. And then finally, the southern colonies, Virginia and Carolina, South Carolina specifically, are the colonies you need to be familiar with when going into this test tomorrow. So let's go back to Jamestown. Now, Jamestown was founded in 1607. It was founded as a joint stock colony. The men are going to come over, and the first winter is going to be very tough. And if it's not, if it weren't for John Smith, they probably wouldn't survive. Now, don't get John Smith, the movie star, from the Pocahontas movie, confused with John Smith from, real life. John Smith was we talked about he was a jerk, but he was a jerk who got them through the very first winter, which was very important. Now, he is going to build a relationship with the Powhatan Indians, and this is going to be an example of the Native American relationship with Native Americans. Or I'm sorry, the English relationship with the Native Americans. The English saw the Native Americans as a temporary tool towards success. We're going to go ahead and we're going to look to the Native Americans for help. We're going to accept trade with them. But as soon as we're able to go on our own, we just want them to get out of our way. And that was true with the Powhatan Indians. The Powhatan Indians came in willing to help, willing to trade. And then what we find is as the English started growing, they wanted the Powhatans to move. They wanted their land, and they started encroaching on their land. This is going to lead, down the road to the Powhatan Wars. There's going to be 3 wars between the Virginia colonists and the Powhatans. And probably one of the most famous battles is probably that engraving we saw in class of the 1622 massacre at Jamestown. And we talked about how that engraving was created from an English point of view to demonstrate the savagery of the Native Americans. Obviously, you can't take that as truth. But there was savagery because in that one massacre, 347 English colonists were killed, including women and children. Beyond the dealings with the Native Americans, what the English colonists also had to deal with in Jamestown was a very difficult winters and lack of preparation. And that's going to lead to, in 1609 and 1610, the winter referred to as the starving time, where we see over half the colonists died. In fact, I think we started with something like 200 colonists, and by the end of that winter, we're down to about 60. And so things are not looking good in the English colony of Jamestown. I mean, in fact, they're on the downward trend, and that's when John Rolfe is going to come in. Now, John Rolfe is going to come in, and he's going to introduce something that is going to turn Jamestown into a very successful colony. And what he's going to introduce is the cash crop of tobacco. And it's a sweeter strain of tobacco that he's going to introduce. It's going to be more flavorful. And what's going to be good about it is he's going to be able to take it back to England and into Europe, and they're just going to love it. And the demand for tobacco is just going to go through the roof. And so what that's going to do is going to basically engage more people coming over to the colonies, more people coming over, starting their own farms, more people coming over, planting tobacco, and just generating this cash crop. And that's going to be what saves the English colony. The downside of tobacco and what that did is as more people are coming over and more people, are looking for ways to make money, the Native Americans are going to be pushed further and further away from their land, and those Powhatan Wars are going to really take off. I mentioned the massacre at 1622 at Jamestown. Keep in mind that after that happened, the English are going to step in and change the status of the Jamestown colony from a joint stock company to a royal company. And they're going to be under royal control at this point. But they're still making money, so everyone's happy. Also, what you probably need to know about Jamestown during this time is the labor force. The labor force initially was indentured servants. A lot of these indentured servants came over on the headright system. Now, the headright system, if you could pay someone's passage to come over, you would get 50 acres of land. What's going to happen, though, is we're going to see the headright system, the indentured servants, they're going to start gaining their freedom. And as they gain their freedom, they're going to want, basically their own chance to make money. So they're going to be getting some land. But for the indentured servants, Virginia was a very aristocratic type colony. You had the wealthy landowners, and they're not going to give up their good land to these indentured servants who are seen as poor and unworthy. So what's going to happen is the indentured servants is going to be moved into what we call the frontier, which is really about, 20 miles inland from the coast, and they're going to be given land there to start their own farms. The problem is this land was not as good as the Tidewater region. And on top of that, they're right in the middle of Native American lands. So they're going to have to deal with a lot of Native American attacks and raids and stuff like that. So they go to Governor Berkeley and they say, hey, come help us. We're part of this English colony too. The problem is Governor Berkeley had a relationship with the Native Americans as well, but his relationship was not adversarial, it was business, and he had a lot of trade relationships with them. So he wasn't too keen on helping out the frontier settlers. Enter Nathaniel Bacon. And Nathaniel Bacon's going to come in, and he is going to demand that that Berkeley step up and start defending him, or he said, I'm going to create my own army and we'll defend ourselves, which is exactly what he ends up doing. He's going to create his own army. He's going to start raiding Indian villages. He's even going to get to the point where he's going to go, just to get to Berkeley, he's going to burn down Jamestown. This is what's referred to as Bacon's Rebellion. Now, Berkeley is going to be recalled back to England temporarily. The rebellion is going to be put down primarily because Nathaniel Bacon gets sick, and so there's no one else to step in when he dies and leads. But what Bacon's Rebellion shows us, and everything in history is connected, and that's what you really got to realize. Bacon's Rebellion, 1676. That's 100 years prior to the Declaration of Independence. But what Nathaniel Bacon and the frontier settlers did was they rose up against an authority that they felt that government was not protecting them. So they're going to take some pre-Enlightenment viewpoints that if this government's not protecting us, we have the right to overthrow it. And that's exactly what they did. So Bacon's Rebellion kind of serves as a precursor to the American Revolution in 1776. The other effect of Bacon's Rebellion is probably the one that most people are more familiar with and not really too comfortable with, and that's going to be the influx of African slaves. Now, African slaves were introduced to Jamestown in 1619. However, you're not going to see many slaves coming into the colonies until after 1650, more precisely after Bacon's Rebellion. Because due to Bacon's Rebellion, these Tidewater planters aren't going to want to bring any more indentured servants in because, man, they just might rise up against us too. So they start investing in a permanent labor force, and that's the African slaves. So I think you guys did in your notebook, there was a graphical representation of population, and it showed the rise of population around 1650, 1660 in that time. A lot of that was due to the influx of African slaves coming into the colonies as a result of Bacon's Rebellion. So that's kind of where we're at, as far as Jamestown. The next area we want to talk about is going to be the New England colonies. Now, the New England colonies are going to start primarily in 1620. 1620 is the year that the Pilgrims come on the Mayflower. The Pilgrims are going to be coming now. Like I said in an earlier slide, the New England colonies are founded primarily for religious reasons. You have these people in England who are separatists. They don't like the Church of England. They want to separate from it. They go to the Netherlands. It doesn't work out for them there. So, they're going to come back. And I see a question. The abolishment of the head rights. Yeah, Bacon's Rebellion is one of those key events you need to know about in history. Absolutely. So make sure you do know, like you wrote right there, that it abolished the head right system, it abolished indentured servitude, and more importantly, it's going to lead to the rise of African slavery within the United States, and we're not going to turn back. Once we commit fully to African slavery, there's no going back at that point. So, I mean, really, well, I'm not even going to go there because that might just confuse you. It's just what you have right there. That's what you need to know. Getting back to the New England region, what you need to know, the Pilgrims are these separatists that went over to the Netherlands, couldn't find a home there because they were losing their English culture. So they came back to England, got a charter to come over to the New World, come over to the English colonies. They were originally chartered by the Virginia Company. They were supposed to settle very close to where Jamestown was. You know, stuff happens, they get blown off course, and they actually end up near Massachusetts in Plymouth, and they decide to settle there. Due to the fact that they were off course and everything, that's when they're going to draft the Mayflower Compact. Mayflower Compact is the first attempt at self-government, or not the first attempt, but the first written document with self-government that we're going to see in the colonies, and they're going to settle the Plymouth colony. Now, like previous colonial settlements, they weren't prepared for winter and everything, but fortunately they made a friend in the Wampanoag Indians, and one of the leaders of the Wampanoags was Squanto. Squanto's going to come in, teach them how to fish, teach them how to farm, and help them get through that first winter. And of course, you know, they have the big feast, you know, Thanksgiving and all that jazz. Make sure you know the relationship between the Plymouth colonists and the Wampanoag Indians, that it was a friendly relationship at first. The Plymouth colony is going to basically be eventually swallowed up by the Massachusetts Bay Colony. And the Massachusetts Bay Colony is going to be settled in 1630. And in 1630, that's when the Puritans are going to come over. Now, Puritans and Separatists, remember, are completely different. Separatists want to separate from the Church of England. Puritans want to purify the Church of England. They want to clean it up. They want to get all of the Catholic traditions out of there and basically create this perfect church. And they were trying to do that in England, and it was just ticking everybody off. They were being persecuted for their beliefs and everything. So they said, we're going to come over to the New World, and we're going to set up our own perfect religious colony. And that's going to be the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Now, where William Bradford was the governor of the Plymouth colony for almost 30 years, John Winthrop, that's that guy down there on the bottom right, he is going to be the governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. And no doubt about it, the Massachusetts Bay Colony was a theocracy. It was run by the church. Now, they will have some self-government. We will see some representative government come in there, but the church really controls that. In fact, John Winthrop is going to give his famous City on a Hill speech. And in that speech, he's going to talk about how the world is watching, we can't screw up. And it wasn't, I mean, like I talked in my class, I talked about the idea that a lot of our politicians have misquoted this speech saying that, America is a city on the hill, just like John Winthrop said, and everyone's watching us to be like us. John Winthrop had a completely different viewpoint. He said, everyone's watching us, don't screw up. We don't want anybody, we don't want to go down in history as a failure. So it was more out of fear instead of reverence that he wanted people, that he said people were watching us, so we got to be good. But needless to say, the Puritan colony is going to get started. They're going to be successful, and that's going to lead to what's known as the Great Migration. Now, the Great Migration occurs from 1630 to 1650, and what we're going to see there is we're going to see nearly 25,000 Puritans make the trek across the Atlantic Ocean to the New World. Now, I mentioned that because in my class, I was very surprised how very few people talked about the Great Migration in their notebooks. That's an important thing to know, because this is one of the first migrations in American history, and that's one of the key ideas you need to understand when we're going throughout the year. So make sure you know about the Puritan Great Migration. Going back to this, John Winthrop, they set up this colony, but it wasn't always rosy. The problem with the New England colonies, the Massachusetts Bay colonies, is they came across for religious freedom. However, they did not offer religious freedom. In fact, they didn't tolerate anyone who went against the Puritan church. And in my class, we talked about Roger Williams, and we talked about Anne Hutchinson and how they dissented, how they had trouble with the church in the Massachusetts Bay Colony. In fact, Williams, his big problem was that there was no separation between the church and the state and the government. He said you have to have that separation. He said there's too much church control and everything. And Hutchinson questioned the actual religion, and started having home Bible studies, and and started talking about how she had this gift where she could see who was saved and who was not saved. And what's going to happen is both of these people are going to be exiled from the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Roger Williams is going to go start the Rhode Island colony, in which he actually purchases land from the Native Americans, called called the Providence Plantations. And he is going to start his own colony, and it's going to be based on this idea of the separation of church and state. And, that was the first time, really, that we've seen that idea come forward within the colonies. And Hutchinson will follow Roger Williams, and she'll actually take like 60 followers with her. She doesn't go alone. And in doing so, she goes there. Now, some of the followers are going to stay in Rhode Island, but Anne Hutchinson is going to choose to go on to New York. She's actually going to, unfortunately, meet her demise when she and her family are massacred by Native Americans in modern-day the Bronx, New York. Next, I want to talk about more relationships between the Native Americans and the English. The Puritans especially. Now, the Puritans really, okay, let me make it real clear, and I'm going to put myself on the screen just so you guys know. The English did not come to convert the Native Americans, period. That was never their goal. The English came for monetary reasons. The English came for economic reasons, but the English never came to convert. Now, did some conversions happen? Absolutely. Roger Williams up in his colony, you had some conversions up there. You had some other Native Americans converting with the Quakers and stuff, so you saw Native American praying towns and stuff. But that was never a goal of the English colonists. Please just pound that through your head, because for some reason we want to keep saying that the English wanted to convert the Native Americans. What the English wanted to do was push the Native Americans completely out of the way. When we talk about when we look at the Puritans, my gosh, in Massachusetts, they were pushing the natives as far away as they could. And one of those Native Americans they pushed a little too hard was Metacom. Metacom, his English name was King Philip. And we're going to see another example of Native Americans coming together under one umbrella to fight the English colonists. And it's known as King Philip's War. And what Metacom did was he allied a whole bunch of tribes to fight against the English, and they actually saw some success. But again, just like we saw with the Pueblo Indians, those ties that bind are gonna come loose. And so he's not going to have the alliances that he thought he would, and the rebellion's going to fall apart. But once again, we see the strength of the Native Americans when they come together. Another major war that happened with the Puritans was the Pequot War. And the Pequot War, it was an ugly war for the Pequots. In fact, it almost drove them to their extinction. We talked about the massacre at Mystic River and how, the Pequot tribe was down to just hundreds at that point. And many of the men after that battle were sold into slavery in the Caribbean, and the women and children who were left were integrated in other tribes like the Mohegan and the Narragansett and stuff like that. And so, we saw the Pequot almost go to extinction, but we also learned that they're going to make a comeback to where today they're one of the strongest tribes in the country. But the relationship between the Native Americans and the English was, a lot of times, like with the Pilgrims and with Jamestown, and even with the Puritans, they traded with them at the beginning. It starts off as a economic benefit, but as soon as the colonists get their feet on the ground, when they're strong enough to take care of themselves and they don't need the Indians anymore, they take that patent stance of just get the hell out of my way because here we come. So that's a lot of the stuff that's going to be on you need to know for the test tomorrow. That's going to take us to the middle colonies. Before I go to the middle colonies, I just want to take a breather, see if you guys have any questions at this point. I've been going really fast. It's been half an hour right now. So before I go to the middle colonies and the southern colonies, I just want to double check and make sure no one has any questions. All right, nothing coming through. Very good. All right, so we're just going to keep moving on. The middle colonies are primarily New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware. And probably the most, what we know about the middle colonies is they're going to be settled first by William Penn. And he's going to settle the colony of Pennsylvania. And it's going to be a Quaker-based colony. The Quakers are going to be a religious unit that are going to come from England seeking religious freedom. And they're going to come in, start their pacifist. They work with the Native Americans. They have very, their church is so unheard of because they let women speak and all this other stuff is going on. They're going to settle in Pennsylvania, and not only that, the Quakers are going to expand into New Jersey. It's going to be William Penn who's going to purchase New Jersey from the Duke of York from New York, and he's going to create a new colony. And he shot, yes, this PowerPoint will be on my website. Zeta, the Great Migration, yeah, let me hit that real quick. I talked about it, but let me hit it again. It's basically the time period from 1630, let me put, change this, 1630 to 1650. And what we see is 25,000 Puritans migrate from England to the Massachusetts Bay Colony. So that's a 20-year period. It's just, like I said, a huge migration of Puritans because the Puritan colony had been successful. Once John Winthrop got them established, it was that what's the word? I'm going to say settled settlement. They were strong. They were able to take care of themselves, and they were making money. And they had the freedom of worship. So they're going to be able to come over here, practice their Puritan religion. So, like I said, roughly 25,000 people in a 20-year period. So hopefully that answers your question. Okay. All right. Anything else? Cool. Good. All right. Cool beans. Just shoot them if you have them. All right. So when we talk about the Quakers, they're going to come over, start Pennsylvania. They're going to start New Jersey. They're going to offer freedom of religion. And so that's going to be very beneficial in this area. Another colony that comes in, not technically a middle colony, it's a Chesapeake colony, but Maryland is also going to offer some religious freedom. It's going to be a haven for English Catholics. However, while they offer religious freedom, Maryland is only going to offer religious freedom to Christians. As long as you believe in the Trinity, you're good to go. But if not, you're not welcome. So if you don't believe in the Trinity, you can't come in. If you're Jewish, you can't come in. Only Christian religions. Now, it's built as a haven for Catholics, but because they're offering that religious freedom, they're going to see a lot more Protestants come in. And what's kind of ironic about Maryland is while it's created as a haven for Catholics, the Catholics are actually going to face intolerance within Maryland because of the number of Protestants who come in. So the middle colonies, also known as the breadbasket colonies, you have a lot of the grains that are grown there. So obviously it's good for agriculture. The wheat, the oats, the barley, that kind of stuff is going to be grown there. They have deep water ports, which is going to allow for trade and stuff like that. So that makes that a successful colony as well. The southern colonies, the picture tells it all. It's all about the money. Southern colonies were formed primarily for money. You're going to have, obviously, Virginia is established with the cash crop of tobacco. You're going to see that in Maryland as well. They're going to grow tobacco. Down in the Carolinas, they're going to have a lot of growth of agriculture there. More so in South Carolina. North Carolina, you're going to see more independent tobacco farmers. But in South Carolina, you're going to see a more plantation-based society in which they're growing rice. And as these are all, these plantation-based societies and stuff, you're going to see the increase of more and more slaves coming in because they're relying on slave labor. Now, with regards to Georgia, like I told you in class, Georgia is the armpit. That's basically where England's dumping all their problems. You have a lot of people who are in debtor's prison over in Georgia, and because of that, the prisons are overflowing, and so they're going to offer these people, okay, you can go to prison or you can go to Georgia. And in some people's opinion, it's the same thing either way. But a lot of them are going to come to Georgia under the leadership of James Oglethorpe. And James Oglethorpe is going to set up this colony. It's going to be a lot of small independent farmers, a lot of rules in place. They can't drink. No slaves are allowed, stuff like that. So it's really tight control on those colonies of Georgia. Okay. What's next? All right. So just to recap, these are the economic basis for the three colonial regions. When we talk about New England, we're talking about commerce. And when I say commerce, I'm talking about trade. They were big on shipbuilding. We've talked several times about Rhode Island and the shipbuilding enterprises they had there and how important they were basically to the slave trade. And fishing, obviously. They're right there on the coast. A lot of deep water ports. They're going to get some fishing. Whale oil is a huge commodity for the New England colonies. We talk about the mid-Atlantic or the middle colonies, basically the staple crops, the wheat, the corn, the barley, the oats, and a lot of family farms. You don't see the large producing farms like you do in the southern colonies. You don't see plantations and stuff there. And then finally in the southern colonies, it's all about cash crops. tobacco, rice, indigo, and slave labor. Now, I should point out that basically at this point in our history, all the colonies have some form of slavery. There are slaves in all the colonies, but it's centered primarily on the Chesapeake colonies, which is Virginia and Maryland, as well as the southern colonies. That's where the bulk of the slaves are going in. But for initially, slavery was permitted throughout all the colonies, and all the colonies did have slaves. So just keep that in mind, just in the back of your mind. Nothing. It's not like a major point, but you might want to just keep that thought going. Next, we want to talk about the triangle trade. This is a big idea you need to know. Make sure you're comfortable with the idea of the triangular trade between the Caribbean, North America, England, as well as the west coast of Africa. In my class, we talked about, molasses to rum to slaves, where you had the sugar coming from the Caribbean, which is going to be converted into molasses, which is going to be used to make rum. The rum is then going to be able to go over and be traded for slaves. It's also going to go up to England as well. That's kind of like the basis of triangular trade. However, there's also the idea of mercantilism in the sense that we're going to, we're here to provide raw materials for the English colonies, and those raw materials are going to go back over to England. They're going to turn them into manufactured finished goods, and then they're going to be sold not only in parts of Europe, but they're also going to be sold back to the colonies, and a little bit down in Africa too. Mercantilism was the driving force of the English presence in North America. Without a doubt, England was making money off its colonies. Otherwise, it wouldn't have stayed here. But you have to remember the colonies were making money too. We talked about that cartoon, and I'm sorry I don't have the cartoon here on my PowerPoint. I should have put it on there. But it's the queen sitting at the table, and she's big and hefty and fat, and the colonies are there feeding her. And what you need to remember is if the colonies aren't healthy, they're not going to be able to continue to serve the queen. So the colonial regions were making money as well. So it wasn't just, England stripping the colonies dry of their resources. Yes, they were taking their resources and using them to sell back to the colonies, but they weren't taking them for free. The colonial people who were doing all that, they were making money as well. England tried to regulate their mercantilism basically through the Navigation Acts. And we talked about the different Navigation Acts that were passed. It primarily set up laws that the colonies could only trade with England, the colonies could only use English ships, the colonies couldn't make any deals with any other countries, the colonies had to pay taxes. There were, we talked about the import taxes coming in to raise the prices of foreign goods, so only English goods would get made. But that's how it was all operated on, is this idea of mercantilism. Giovanni, no, don't worry about England's other colonies. If you're talking about over in Asia and stuff like that, the only colonies you need to worry about are the ones that are going to become the American colonies. So just that's all you need to focus on. And these colonies, under the system of mercantilism, they found a way, though, to get around a lot of, these Navigation Acts. And it was because England was practicing what's called salutary neglect. No, the Gaspee instance, no, that's later. So salutary neglect basically is this idea that England is kind of ignoring or not enforcing the laws in the colonies. When you think about it, you can go different places in our country and you see speed limits, and if there's no one there to enforce the speed limit, all right, I'll say, I won't say I'll say I have the tendency to kind of go over the speed limit because no one's there enforcing it. Same way with the colonies. They're not enforcing the Navigation Act, so what you're going to see is a lot of the colonial colonists, they're going to go out and they're going to set up trading partnerships with other countries. They're going to start using their own ships to smuggle goods to other countries and bring other goods in. So all of that is going to be, kind of overlooked by England. And the main reason why is because England's making money. And as long as England is making money, they're not going to start putting their thumb down on the colonists and trying to control every single move. It's going to be, as long as it's good for me, I'll leave you alone. But once it stops being good for me, that's when we're going to have a problem. And that's what we're going to see in the next section when we get to 1763 and 1765, and we see some of England trying to now start enforcing laws that they haven't enforced for almost 100 years. So all of that is going to be be going on during this time. 1700 to 1750, by this point, all the colonies have been formed, so we have 13 English colonies in place. The two big things you need to know about during this time is going to be the Great Awakening and the Enlightenment. And these are two huge movements that are going to have long-lasting effects on the colonies and later on the United States. And so make sure you know about the Great Awakening and make sure you know about the Enlightenment. Now keep in mind that neither one of these were actually, they didn't occur together. They occurred at the same time, but it wasn't about, they weren't intertwined with each other. The Great Awakening was a religious revival. And I don't know if the next slide shows that or not. Let me see. No. Okay. So I'll just talk about it this way. It was a religious revival in the colonies because we saw a lot of people started falling away from the church. We saw secularism start to move in. The young people had started to go. And if you remember correctly, back in, what was it? The Halfway Covenant that was set up by the Puritans in 1662, I think it was, that the Halfway Covenant was passed, where it was trying to attract young people to come back to the church. So they were saying, you don't have to fully commit to the church. You don't have to fully, you can be baptized, but you don't have to be, confirmed and stuff. We just want you here in the church. Well, the problem with the Halfway Covenant is the other half can just fall away. And if you're not fully committed, you are going to fall away. So what we see is a huge need for religious revival in our country, and it actually starts over in England. The Great Awakening is viable in all English colonies or all English-speaking world, especially in the colonies. And it's going to start with John Wesley over in England, and he's going to start talking about this idea of conversion and stuff like that, and that's going to start the Methodist Church, and that's going to come over here. And when we talk about the Great Awakening, what we're talking about is a lot of itinerant preachers who are going to travel up and down the colonial coastline and into all the colonies and stuff, preaching this word of God. And we talked about George Whitefield, who came over to the colonies 7 times and hit every single colony. Now, George Whitefield is going to push for equality in the colonies, especially in Georgia. And, he is known for helping get slavery being allowed in Georgia, which is going to allow Georgia to become more of a plantation-based society. But what they're preaching, though, is that, we have the choice of salvation. It's kind of an extension of Calvinism. Though Calvinism taught us of predestination, what the Great Awakening preachers are going to talk about is you're predestined for salvation, but you have to make that choice to go after it. And so people are realizing we have this choice to choose salvation or not to choose salvation. And Jonathan Edwards, who was a pastor out of Massachusetts, now he had his own church, but he also, one of his most famous speech or sermons was the sinners in the hands of an angry God, where that fire and brimstone preaching, where I'm going to bring emotion in. I'm going to tell you God is angry because you're a sinner. And if you have to turn away from that sin and you have to convert and you have to commit to God and everything like that. And what we're going to see happening is this Great Awakening is going to start this huge religious revival in the colonies. And like I told my class, it's like this, if you picture this tidal wave coming over the land, it just like encompassed the entire colonial region. And so they're fighting that. Now, Samuel, you'll bring up a good point. You said, did the Enlightenment cause some of the secularization that caused the Great Awakening? It was the secularization was already going. The Enlightenment is going to exemplify it. It's going to maybe exasperate a little bit. It's going to help it grow a little bit. But so did it cause some of it? Yeah, it did. But there was already a problem, because we can go all the way back to 1662 with the Halfway Covenant, and you could see that secularization was already moving into the colonies at this point. But the key idea with the Great Awakening, though, is that people have a choice. you're bringing emotion into the church, you're bringing passion into the church, but you're also bringing choice into the church. And if I can choose my God, does that mean I can choose something else? Then comes the Enlightenment. And the Enlightenment was what we call also known as the Age of Reason. And you have this whole other movement of empiricism and deism and stuff like that, where people are saying it's not what we believe, but it's what we can prove. We learn through our experiences, and we know, how things work based on, science and stuff like that. And so you have all this going on. And so, yeah, it does cause more secularism, within the church. But it also causes this wave of change within political systems. John Locke is going to introduce, he's probably, the leading factor as far as American colonies are concerned. He's going to introduce this idea of natural rights, this idea that we're born with life, liberty, and property, and that it's the government's job to protect those. And if the government's not doing its job, we got to keep going. Am I still online? There we go. I'm sorry. My screen went dry. Something just happened. Am I still live, guys? Can you still hear me? I lost it. Let me try again. Guys, I'm not sure what happened, but my screen went dead for a while, so it might have booted you out, but I'm back now. So, okay, you could still hear me. All right, cool. That's good. All right, so can you still hear me now? Because I clicked it off and then I clicked it back on. So it looks like we're up and running. Okay. So John Locke is going to introduce this idea of natural rights, that we're born with life, liberty, and property. And in life, liberty, and property, we have, we look to the government to protect us. And if the government's not protecting us, it's our job to tell the government, hey, we're going to change you out. So that's what the Enlightenment was all about. And that's going to come in and influence, leaders in the future like Thomas Jefferson and Thomas Paine and Benjamin Franklin. And so we're going to see all that going on. And so while the Great Awakening is teaching us, man, we can choose salvation if we want, the Enlightenment is going to say, and we can choose our government. And now we're starting to see we don't need a king. We don't need, a ruler, to tell us what we should believe. We don't need a king to tell us, what our religion should be. We can decide that for ourselves. So the big idea that comes out of both the Enlightenment as well as the Great Awakening is this idea of individualism, that we are individuals and we have the right to make decisions for ourselves, whether it be our church, whether it be our government, what we do for a living, all that other stuff. And so these two big ideas are going to lead us into the next time period when we get to the revolution, and they're going to be the underlying, foundational blocks that we build the revolution on. All right. So I think I hit most of the stuff. Let me see if I have another slide or anything. Locke's values, some of the things that the Enlightenment taught us was religious toleration and consent of the government, that right that we have to revolt should the government not be doing their job. So just keep that in mind, that was there for us too. The political tradition, so what effect does this have on the colonies, or what are we going to start seeing on the colonies? When I didn't talk a lot about politics in the colonies in class and stuff. We talked about the House of Burgesses. We talked about the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut. But if you want to kind of wrap it up with political traditions, if you look at it, the idea of a constitutional government is going to be introduced by the New England colonies. That's where you're going to get your Fundamental Orders of Connecticut and stuff like that. And this idea of, the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut is going to be the first written constitution in the colonies. But down in the southern colonies, that's where we're going to get this idea of a representative government. We got the House of Burgesses, and throughout the southern colonies, we're going to see more town meetings and stuff spring up. And so that's going to be these two big ideas that come out of this time period. The southern colonies are probably the most democratic of all the colonies, just because, they're making their money, they're doing their own thing. But we're going to see ideas coming from both regions, okay? There's the town meetings up in New England. More democratic up in England at times, but egalitarian. You had to be property owners and stuff in that region. So, There's your House of Burgesses for your representative aristocratic type rule. And don't forget salutary neglect. Okay, so that's what I have as far as PowerPoint. Okay, I noticed that someone asked me to talk about the Spanish caste system, and I can hit that really quick. With the Spanish caste system, what you had was at the very top you had the impresarios, the peninsulares. These are the Spanish-born whites. They were born in Spain, and then they came over here. Right below them, you have oh, I'm drawing a blank on their name. If someone can help me with it out, but below the peninsulares, you have the next level, which is those Spanish citizens who are born in the colonies. So they don't rank as high, but they are Spanish citizens, so they're upheld. Beneath that, you have the mestizos. Mestizos is the cross between the Spanish and the Native Americans, and then beneath that, you're going to have the Native Americans and the slaves. So that's kind of the caste system of the Spanish colonies. Again, the Spanish-born, the Spanish who are born in Spain, they are at the top. The Spanish-born in the colonies, they're right below them, and then underneath them, the mestizos, the Creoles, and then the Native Americans and the slaves. So I don't have a chart. There's a chart on one of my PowerPoints online. If you want to look at that, you go to my PowerPoints on Spanish colonization, and there's actually a pyramid chart on that. So that's a quick explanation. I don't know, Melanie, if that hit you what you wanted. Thank you, Creoles. I don't know if that's what you wanted, but that's pretty much it. So any other questions you guys have that I can answer for you? While I'm waiting for some questions to come in, let me just remind you the test tomorrow is 30 stimulus-based questions. Which means that you have 30 multiple choice questions, all stimulus-based. There is no knowledge-based questions. The knowledge you are going to show off when you're answering the stimulus-based questions. Now, I explained to my class, and I don't know if there's anybody here from Ms. Delgado's class, when you're looking at the test with the multiple choice, and Brianna, I see your question, I'll answer that in just a second. The multiple choice questions, generally you have a stimulus with 3 questions that follow. The very first question is definitely going to be directed right at the stimulus. So you can see that. You can maybe use the stimulus to answer the question. Take time with the stimulus. Read the source, read the year, read where it's coming from. Make sure you understand that. And sometimes, you can answer that first question without actually reading the entire stimulus. But, know what you're looking for. Read the questions first before you go in. Read that first question and then read the stimulus. The next 2 questions after that stimulus are going to be based on your historical knowledge and its tie to that stimulus. So that's why the knowledge is so important going into that test. So 30 questions like that, and then on Thursday we're going to do the short answer question. The secret, guys, with the short answer, and I've told my class this, I don't know, you're probably tired of me hearing about it, it's the details. You're using way too general answers to answer these questions. So remember, use ACE. A for answer the question, C for cite historical information, and E for explain it why it's important. Or use the Y acronym. What is the answer? What historical information that supports the answer, and why is it important? I tell my class the power of 3. You should have at least 3 sentences, but quite honestly, on the short answer, to get a really good, solid answer, I would say more than 3. I'd say 5 sentences, 6 sentences. Just make sure that I can't read that and say, man, what else? Why do you say that? Treat me when I'm grading your test like I know nothing about history, okay? So you're going to have that one short answer, one 3-part short answer on Thursday. Now, with regard to the Peter Zenger case, yeah, that's definitely something you need to be familiar with because that's the case that's going to lead to the freedom of the press in our country. So be familiar just with the basics of that, Brianna, and you'll be fine. How often do I do these live streams? Well, what I do is the night before every exam, I'll do a live stream, and I do a lot of these reviews. Every Sunday at 5 o'clock on Twitter, I also do a quick 5 to 10 minute review of what we talked about the week before. I mean, I don't mind doing these live streams. If you guys want me to do them more often, I'm happy to do that. Just let me know so I can set them up. I mean, I'm not going to do it every single night. I do have somewhat of a life, although it's not much, but I do have a life. And so, but I'm happy to do, if you want me to start doing a live stream midway through a unit, I'm happy to do that. They'll be a little bit shorter, but we can do that. The great thing about these live streams is once I'm done, I'll hit process in YouTube, and while it might take about an hour or so to process, it will be available to watch. You can watch it later tonight, you can watch it tomorrow, and even as we go throughout the year, it stays on my YouTube channel, so it will be there. A brief overview on the Zenger case. Yeah, basically Peter Zenger, what he did was he published writings in a colonial newspaper speaking out against the New York royal governor. And what's going to happen is he's going to be arrested. And so he is going to, he is basically going to be arrested. He's going to go to trial challenging the ruling. And that's where we get the idea for freedom of the press, that the press should have the freedom to basically complain about the government without having to face any repercussions. That's the whole idea of a free press. If our press is worried about repercussions from a government, they're going to hold back on what they report. And Peter Zenger is what's going to hit that. So if you just know that Zenger is going to lead to this idea of freedom of press, you'll be fine. Oh, I'm going to show you, I got to show you Flynn. You know I will. He was giving me a little hassle earlier. I don't know if you heard him throughout this thing. He was growling down here with me. He wanted me to throw the ball. So, but if there's no more questions, I'll try to get him over here so you can see him. So, any questions coming over? All right, I'm going to try to get him over here and see what we can do. I'm going to have to yell for him, so just be with me. Hey, Flynn, come here. Come here. Come here. No, get up here. Come here. No. Get up here. Come here. Get up here. Come on. Come here. He's trying to get his ball. It's a tight area. Come on. Ready? Get up. Get up here. Come on. Oh, come on. Get up here. Get in the chair. Get up. Oh, see? I got his collar. That counts. Get up here. Get up. All the way. Oh, fine. Don't worry. Don't give up. Come on. Oh, there he goes. There he is. Here's Flynn. Speak. Yeah. All right, you saw him. I'll try to get him some more, but where's your ball? Where's your ball? Go get your ball. Bring it over here. Come here. He's got his ball right now, so that's all he wants to see. Is that enough, or can I get him? You want me to get him up here? Come here. Oh, see, he's gone now, so I got his ball. Come here. Come get it. Come get it. Yeah. All right, that's it. All right, I'm sorry. We just got a quick Flynn tonight. We didn't get very much. Want a treat? Yeah, I'll get it better. Let me see. All right, guys, that's all I got. If you have any questions, I'll be up for a little bit later tonight. You can always send me questions on Remind. I think you're gonna do fine on the test. Don't stress out about it. Just relax. Come in tomorrow. You know, we'll get the test right away. I'll hand out your answer sheets, and we'll get going on it, all right? One more time. Come here. No, he doesn't going to come up. All right, and I'll get you a better look at Flynn next time, okay? So, all right, have a good night. Study hard. Don't stay up too late, and don't, you know, I know my class is the most important, but you can go ahead and study for other classes too, all right? All right, we'll see you later, guys. Good night.